Chapter 5 Forest Before Fortress. The meeting room had all the amenities of a jail cell. Its uneven stone walls gave off a damp smell. Two metal doors creaked on rusted hinges. In the room's center, a gaunt man sat at a rickety table. He finished an explanation with, "Those are the details. Simply obtain the item and escape with minimal collateral damage." Across the table, one of the three misfits piped up. "Keymaster Cudgel, cannot your own men address this? I am not fond of an indirect approach." As soon as the dragon's jaw shut, her dwarf orc companion weighed in. "I'll bet they want to use us, because we can't be tracked back to them if we fail." Standing up to reveal her full draconic height, Takal's deep voice roared. "Now that I have seen you, I question your claim of reporting directly to the Praetor." Phil interjected by tapping the table loudly. "If you have that kind of connection, maybe you could get me into the cistern. I'd love to peruse the magical gemstones and pick one out as a souvenir." Goal's ears perked up. Normally I'd prefer payment in cold hard gold, but I'll settle for a gem nowadays. Did you ever tell me the reason behind your recent fascination with jewels?" "Oh, I have my reasons. It's kind of like a favor to an old friend." The tiefling patted the bag that held his spellbook. "Oh, I see. Some sort of weird warlock thing. Gotcha." Phil was a ball of eager energy. Getting to know counselors would really put tieflings on the map, don't you think? The reformed burglar put her hands behind her head. "Sorry, but I've got no interest in politics. The fewer important people know my face, the better." The keymaster struck the table with a bony fist. "I've given you all the information that I have to give. I'll honor your request if you succeed." The conversation faded into mumbled confirmations. Keymaster, the title given to the head of information in the city of Simasla, charged with a variety of tasks, including investigation and overseeing city infrastructure. Answers only to the Praetor. Map in hand, Phil guided them north of Simasla. They sidestepped the vile slugwood by cutting through a lush green forest to the east. While navigating the forested area, they passed a shabby village. Signs erected by the closed-minded residents spurned the adventurers. Crude drawings of dead orcs, goblins, and demons decorated the worn wooden chunks. This sight made the trio happy to leave the forest behind. Takal took advantage of the travel time to preach. Her words made Goal's ears curl like rotting produce. "Never take for granted the efforts of others. We are all too aware of our own labors. Reward those who rise to meet us in effort. Rebuke leeches who fatten themselves on cruelty." Shooting into the speech like an arrow, Goal quipped, "Do you ever get tired of talking?" Takal turned her head towards the insult. "Do you ever tire of greed?" "Words can turn a profit, or they can earn you a knife in the back. But gold is always useful." The dwarf orc glared at the paladin. "I would rather soak in the golden father's grace than drown in dirty coins." Meekly, Phil attempted to broker peace. "Hey guys, can't we agree to disagree? We're different kinds of people after all." "You make a good point. I'm not the kind of person that takes every breath as if it were her last." "Panting is the only way my race expels heat, you sweaty oaf." Fury swelled within the Dragonborn. "Were it not for our shared acquaintance, I would have left you in Actinop." The argument was punctuated by a pointing Phil. Hey! Look at that! Even earlier than expected!" Tiny in the distance, they spied their objective. The fort was simultaneously imposing and ordinary. Tall stone walls were neither ancient nor fresh. A pair of guards snoozed by the open gate. Slapping Phil's back gently, a gleeful Goal said, "Use that floating disc of yours, and we can sail right to the top." Wincing from the impact, the warlock replied, Correct me if I'm wrong, but you don't pay much attention when magic involved, do you? Goal answered his question with an eager smile. Not my area of expertise. Now can you do it or not? Phil glanced upward, estimating the building's height. Hate to disappoint, but the disc can only move a few feet up or down. The old-fashioned way it is, then. 2 concussions and 1 lecture later, they were inside. The interior was damp and poorly lit, but had a pleasant, fruity aroma. A short while in, they came to a sharp turn. The three put ears to the corner, turning in unison to find a guard patrolling the stone-walled hallway. Phil turned to his companions and tapped his temple. Goal rolled her eyes before reluctantly nodding. The warlock spoke directly into his party's brains. What should we do? He quickly discovered that touching Goal's mind was like sticking an uncovered hand into an overflowing gutter. The tiefling's face scrunched slightly at the filthy feeling. What did she say? A grim grin stretched between Goal's 2 tusks. You can hear me, but Nanny here can't? In that case, I've never met a more stuck-up excuse for a... No! She hit me! Is she telepathic too? Heaving a sigh, Phil responded, No, I think it was the look on your face. Back to business. That guy looks pretty weak-willed. I could give him a little headache or a serious migraine. Let's go with the second one, Goal replied in a heartbeat. The warlock whispered the spell, causing dark thoughts to slither into the watchman's head. They lingered for a moment at the edge of perception, winding tendrils across his brain. All at once they squeezed down in a vicious mental assault. Soon after, the watchman ran out of the building, clutching his head. A silent stroll down the hall led to a set of stairs. They were carpeted in mold and mildew. Goal noticed imprints that indicated recent activity. Keeping ears perked, she stayed alert to her surroundings. Phil flamboyantly fluttered down the hall, indulging in its sickly sweet smell. Takal remained austere as she followed close behind. The group descended the steps, stopping short of the bottom. 4 eyes glimpsed a guard and a heavy iron door. 2 pupilless eyes and the horned head attached to them continued forward, unaware of the danger. A drab brown hand jerked him back by the collar. Goal tapped her head twice, indicating another thought conversation. Following that brainstorm, the tiefling sent out another spell. The iron door rattled as if it were being lightly struck. The guard removed a key from his pocket and a club from his belt. He complained loudly as he unlocked the door. Have to heard the damn dragon blighted again. Lucky me. Goal swiftly unsheathed the short sword. With a thud, the hilt gave the hard-working guard some well-deserved rest. Takal bubbled with frustration, supplanting their stealth with a sermon. I've preached many religions, but I'm an acolyte of Oromut first and foremost. Being a noble god, he's ashamed of this underhanded approach. Upon hearing this, her devilish companion couldn't help but hold his tongue. I think keeping people alive is pretty honorable. Hard to make friends with corpses. Goal added, I've known people who make corpses of friends. Shut your mouths and we can discuss the moral implications of this later. The iron door opened to a sprawling room, decorated with shackles and cages. Interrogation tools were strewn about the floor haphazardly. Half a dozen pale feet shuffled around, occasionally tripping on the gruesome instruments. Their flesh had the uneven texture of a storm cloud in spite of their humanoid shape. Gashes and jagged cracks covered the area that their tattered clothes didn't conceal. Their hollow eyes glowed a deep blue. The groaning door drew them towards a trio. Goal swooped in, short sword in hand, battering the closest creature. Flecks of skin flew off like a spray of sparks. Quick as lightning, she followed up the hit with a handful of sand from her pocket. Shame I have to dirty those pretty blue eyes. Her disoriented foe flailed around miserably, missing the ducking dwarf orc. Gold rose up, slamming her palm into the creature's jaw. As it fell backward, she wheeled around to impale another dead-eyed monster. Behind her, Phil tried to negotiate, but the humanoid simply shuffled towards him. He attempted to reach their minds, but found only a mass of confused suffering. Suddenly, the group approaching Phil were frozen to the floor. The tiefling turned to see Takal recovering from the kickback of her dragon breath. Sighing, he removed his gloves and began blasting the paralyzed creatures. With infinitely more fervor, Takal dove in, shattering their brittle bodies. Following a short rest, the team crossed the room and found their objective. A shelf along the back wall held a metal-housed scroll. Occasional dull flashes of light could be seen from within the container. Gold thrust out a greedy hand towards it, triggering an arrow trap. Thankfully, dexterity and stature favored the burglar. Her graceful movement left both teammates speechless. Returning to an upright position, she panted, "We've got the goods. Now let's get moving." They stepped out of the fort, blinking as they adjusted to the daylight. Takal gritted her teeth with unease. This fortress had far fewer defenses than I had expected. What could the Keymaster's intentions be? Phil shrugged. He probably underestimated us monstrous races. We finished the mission and we're no worse for wear. Gold chimed in. I don't care what he's planning to do so long as he pays us. We can't all be saints after all. She leaned towards the Dragonborn. Don't your scriptures mention not judging others? Takal grunted and began down the return path. The party's travels led them back to the forested area. The night was warm and the forest was dark, so they quickly reached a consensus about setting up camp. Takal battered trees with her morning star to get firewood. Gol reluctantly lent a short sword to the task of chopping it to chunks. Phil reached into his bag, producing a packet of cured meat and cheese. Untying a rope and removing a cloth lid, he revealed sundry salted vegetables. His waterskin tipped into a jar of spices, creating a thin broth. Takal's contribution came in the form of a small tin case. She unclamped it to reveal some simple cutlery. The empty metal container served as a shallow pot to boil ingredients. Gold took out a tinder box, striking together flint and steel until sparks started a campfire. A breath from Takal quickly snuffed out the fire when the meal was cooked. Well, I'm no gourmet, but it'll go well with the cheese, Phil said, tipping the simple soup into 3 cups. Gold scrutinized the crudely cut chunks of meat and the watery broth. Well, I've lived off worse. Ever tried some Samasla surprise? Well, if I did, it wasn't called that, replied Phil. Takal asked, Why is it a surprise? Gold put down her cup. Because when you're poor, you're surprised to find anything but water in your soup. Detecting discomfort in the air, Phil attempted to lighten the mood. I've always had the bee breakfast. That's whatever you can swipe when they're loading the food stalls in the morning. Bet you did the same, eh, Takal? The Dragonborn snorted. I'd prefer to forget my time in the slums. The bee is part of my past, not my future. Phil raised an eyebrow. Don't you ever want to go back to the slums? You know, help the people that the Praetors Council won't? That version of me is dead. I won't lift up the weak, but I will eliminate those who push them down. Miffed, she took a long draw from her cup. Oromut's breath! This is far too hot. I think my tongue is burnt. Goal snickered. With a reaction like that, you could be on stage. What's the matter, drama mama? Ice Queen can't take the heat? If you must know, I have a sensitive tongue. Breathing frost comes with complications. In fact, wait, what is that smell? The scent of fresh fire filled their humble campsite. The wind carried the smell from deeper inside the forest. Without a word, Phil flew towards danger. Goal removed the spoon from her mouth and spoke calmly. Maybe we shouldn't run towards the burning forest? Grabbing her gear, Takal followed after Phil. The fiends responsible for this will suffer. The dwarf shrugged. Guess I'll finish my soup on the way. Smoke and desperate cries grew as they pushed forward. Takal stumbled between tree trunks, her armor occasionally catching on branches. Phil tripped over roots in his haste. Behind them, Goal finished her food and, with deft steps, caught up to the other two. A battered old man limped towards the trio. Shredded clothes fluttered on his gaunt figure. Long purple bruises covered most of his exposed skin. Cuts, scrapes, and gashes dotted the rest of his emaciated body. One thin arm was tucked against his side as he dragged a broken leg behind him. "You there!" he wheezed, pointing at Goal. "Your kind did this. Damnable goblins!" He hacked violently before continuing. "You monsters weren't satisfied with just stealing our food this time, were you?" Takal stepped forward, confident in her righteousness, but before she could utter a single word, the man collapsed. Phil poked at the body, checking his wrist and chest for signs of life. "Leave him," barked Takal. "We know the perpetrators now." She sprinted toward the village's broken gates. Goal added, "I'm against helping these nobodies. Already had troubles with hicks and goblins. Bet they'd kill us just as soon as look at us." Her argument was drowned out by Phil's chanting. Obsidian energy crackled down the tiefling's arm and into the man, jolting him to life. Upon finishing the spell, he said, "All right, good. Well, good enough. I can't heal him, but I can at least stop the bleeding." He stood up and made his way towards the smoking village. Noticing Goal wasn't beside him, Phil looked over his shoulder. "Hurry up already. We got people to save." The dwarf orc grumbled. "I feel sorry for the arsonists, because these two idiots got me in one nasty mood." The town crawled with green monsters. Their sharp teeth grinned viciously as they climbed around the burning wreckage. Wood and straw houses were ransacked. Spilled flour sacks and upturned carts decorated the unpaved streets. A small pack of goblins emerged from a barn nearby. They wore a mismatched assortment of stained blankets and ripped shirts. Their bloated stomachs hung under visible ribs. Bags of produce were thrown over each and every one of their shoulders. "Hey, put those down!" shouted Phil, alerting all goblins in the vicinity. Goal shook her head. "Great idea, idiot. You just put a bullseye on our backs." Takal snarled. "This is better. Now we won't have to hunt them down." Doors and windows flew open. Small green-skinned humanoids swarmed around the adventurers. They formed a tight circle, their pointed nose lined up like a wall of spears. "I'm guessing negotiation ain't an option," Phil inquired half-heartedly. His teammates ignored him and dove into the fray. Takal's weapon shot like a falling star, battering a goblin and knocking it into its allies. Earholes picking up a sound behind her, she reeled around. A shouting goblin sailed at her as she spun. Raising her left arm, Takal struck the goblin's face with the edge of her shield. The impact knocked rotten teeth from its mouth. Momentum carried the Morningstar's spiked head through a row of goblins. Phil backed away, nervously attempting to broker peace in the language of humans, elves, dwarfs, and tieflings. He ended with, "Hurting me would be a bad idea. It'll do you more harm than good." A wave of goblins surged towards the tiefling. Their ramshackle weaponry consisted of stolen pitchforks, pieces of lumber, and large uneven stones. Their assault met his travel clothes with little resistance. Nearby, Goal's leather armor flexed as she bent her knee. Releasing the tension, she surged forward, a sword in each hand. An upward strike cut a goblin in two. She followed this with a diagonal downward slice, utilizing both blades. The attack dispatched a stocky goblin wearing a pot as a helmet. Goal glanced around and realized the inefficiency of attacking them individually. A sea of green skin flowed around her. Kicking off the ground, she maneuvered backwards, hopping between gaps in the goblins. Goal rifled through the many pouches lining her armor. She pulled out a small sack. She swung the bag in a circle before throwing the contents at the advancing horde. Hundreds of small metal balls spilled from the bag, slipping up the goblins. The dwarf orc stepped forward, ready to finish her prone foes. She was stopped by an explosion of sound behind her. Phil's tail touched a barn wall, grimacing at the approaching green group. There's got to be a reason you're doing this. You're intelligent creatures, after all. Desperate, he reached out his mind, trying to talk telepathically. His brain was flooded with painful images of scaly munchkins and melting goblins. Torrents of flame drowned their small bodies, reducing them to green mush. The goblin who shared these thoughts writhed with trauma. I hate to bring back bad memories, so I'll only hurt you if you hurt me. The warlock's words were ignored, so he started to chant. Undeterred, the goblins advanced, stabbing with their makeshift weapons. The moment one hit, Phil's assailant exploded in a blaze of fire. The next strike towards the tiefling was also met with a roaring carnival of heat. Tongues of flame lingered, scaring away nearby goblins. Phil snapped his fingers twice before noticing the flames spreading. Nearby carts, lumber, and goblins were ignited, contributing to the smoke already in the air. Takal backed towards her companions, shield held at chest height. This heat is blistering. I cannot breathe. We must slay these monsters and leave swiftly. Gol agreed. You're right about leaving. If you want to stay longer, then you're on your own. So be it. I'll return to the campsite once my task is complete. The Dragonborn stomped off in the direction of an unignited house. Phil wiped soot off his garb. Maybe we should help her, huh? Gol grabbed him by the collar. Your helpfulness got us into this mess. She dragged him through the village gates. We've got a campsite to clean up. Takal wrenched the handle, pulling the flimsy door off its hinges. Inside, a goblin was menacing a family of 4. 2 more were stealing from nearby cupboards. Another monster! Don't be alarmed. I am here to smite. The monologue was interrupted by 3 goblins. One leapt at Takal's head, while the other 2 grabbed her legs. Her shield's face caught the leaping goblin mid-attack. With a thrust of her forearm, Takal knocked her assailant away. As she did this, the 2 remaining goblins drew crooked bone knives. They attempted to sink these blades into her scaly skin. The splint armor denied them long enough for Takal to make a counterattack. The Morning Star dropped on the rightmost goblin, crushing it. The other sank a blade into the leather layer of her armor. It reeled a gnarled green hand backwards, preparing to break through with a second strike. The goblin's efforts were interrupted by a bone-shattering kick. By this time, the first goblin had recovered. Its small red eyes darted around the room, sweeping over its companions' corpses and the opposing dragonborn in the doorway. Panicking, it ran into an unoccupied corner. Takal made her way across the small house. Without turning her head, she tossed a strip of scriptures at the family, making them recoil. Takal uttered a short prayer, and the family was surrounded by a shield of golden light. By the end of the prayer, the paladin had reached the far corner. She stood over the goblin, watching it. The red eyes were swollen and bloodshot. When it wasn't choking on tears, it whined unintelligibly. The paladin's approach caused it to roll onto its stomach and clap 2 bony hands together. Takal stared down at the creature, one clawed hand touching her holy symbol, causing the morning star in her right hand to flash radiantly. The family flinched as blood splattered their golden shield. Without a word to the villagers, Takal stepped outside, thinking to herself, Oromut bless the wicked with swift death. The campsite was cleaned up by the time Takal returned. Gol greeted her with an unceremonious shrug, and Phil beckoned them to follow as he hiked down the rough trail that split the forest. The tiefling was the first to break the frustrated silence. Happy to see you made it back intact, Takal. He flashed a friendly smile. You know, those goblins seem pretty darn scared. Do you think they could have been reasoned with? Gol weighed in, quick as a whip. I don't think you can reason with anyone who's shaking a weapon at you and screaming bloody murder. Next time we're surrounded by maniacs, you can give it another try, though. Hearing this caused Takal to inhale deeply. Parasites, stealing the labor of others. Unwilling to produce, they simply burned down the works of others. Our actions were righteous." Phil retorted, "Well, maybe they stole because they had no other option. I mean, you were an urchin once. Can't you relate?" Gold recoiled, realizing the tiefling's mistake. Doubling her pace, Takal calmly said, "Better to be dead than useless. At least the dead feed flowers."